let me just back up here. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Brooklyn Whitby Garden Club and Whitby in Bloom joint seminar. It gives me great pleasure to allow us to do this evening. That's
Oh, you're muted, Hans.
Oh.
You're still muted.
Good evening, everyone. Am I still muted?
Oh, you're good.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Whitby Garden Club and Whitby in Bloom joint webinar. This is the first one we've done as a webinar, but it's I think it's the 8th year that we've had a joint session together. These next 3 weeks or next 3 months will be joint with Whitby in Bloom and Brooklyn Whitby Garden Club. You'll take note of our new name that we've adopted this year. This is our 100th anniversary year, and this is one of the first things that we did to celebrate the 100th anniversary is to modernize our name. Normally, this would be called the Seed and Magazine Book Recycle meeting. People bring in their seeds, excess seeds for seed exchange, bring in some of the books for a book exchange, some of the more current magazines that are still popular or still of value, and we do an exchange. Of course, we won't be able to do any of that this year here in this case, but save them up, and if you've got some great reads, don't hesitate to share them with us in emails back and forth between the members. One of the things that we will do this year is we will continue to have a plant sale. We haven't worked out the exact details yet. That'll be dependent on where we're going to be able to do it. And then after that, it'll be on how we're going to do it. So stay tuned for those details. Excuse me 1 minute. Sorry about that. Let me just say thanks to Laura Scott of the town of Whitby for organizing this. It's too bad she's having a little bit of trouble, but I'm sure she's going to enjoy this anyways. And of course, Sue Green of Whitby in Bloom, who's going to take over after I've done my portion of it. And thanks again for your patience tonight. Of course, there's always a little technical difficulty with everything, but it's not insurmountable. This is the 100th year of our 101st year. We've finished 100 years of our existence as a club. We were originally incorporated as a Brooklyn Horticultural Society, and as I mentioned, we've changed our name to the Brooklyn Whitby Garden Club. And we have great chunks of our history available to us or written, but we've also got great chunks of our history that are missing. And so we're looking for help from the past membership and from the people of the town of Whitby and the village of Brooklyn to help us sort of fill in some of those holes. And we're going to be able to share those in some programs that we're doing with the town of Whitby later this year. We continue to look for pictures and slides and records of the 50s and 60s in particular, where we have very little information. And we've got a good system, a good piece of equipment that we can convert slides and negatives and even some of the pictures to digital photos and be able to include them in a lot of publications. So be forthright coming with them and share them with us. Let us take part in sharing them with others here in the town of Whitby and also with all the members of this of the area. I want to say that we've got a great newsletter that came out this year. I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but I think that's where if you start with the newsletter, you'll see some of the great information that we've been able to compile on the BHS or the BWGC. And we'd like to look for some more of that. And Sherry Howard would be my direction to go to with for the first part of that information. And then we'll go from there to others as the opportunity needs. Of course, not being physically in place, we're not able to physically hold our show competitions, but we will, thanks to the efforts of Sherry Howard and the show team, we will be able to hold a virtual spring floral design and flower show or photo show. If you look into the newsletter, there's lots of details there. There are 3 classes of floral competition and 3 classes of photo competition. The 3 of the floral are Celebration, Lush, and the classic Pick and Plunk. And the photo will be Promise of Spring, Winter Gardens, and Blossoming will be the 3 categories. The due date for it, or the cutoff date for entry, is May 29th. So it gives you some time to get this ready. But it should be really interesting. And what we need are photos of your design, or of course your actual photo itself for the photo competition. But thanks to Sherry and her team for organizing that. Membership cards should have been mailed out to all of the folks that registered in 2020 for the calendar year for the season, and also for those who have registered for 2021. If you didn't register last year, you'll need to register this year and get your new card. This is what they're going to look like. We'll mail them out to you this way. You can just print it off, cut it off, and put it in your wallet or your pocket or your purse. And it'll give you the discounts at a number of the corporate supporters of our club in the local area, from Port Perry right through to Ajax. If you haven't registered, please do so. There is a membership bwgc at gmail.com address, as you see at the bottom of the screen. Right now we have 106 general members, and we have 35 corporate members for a total of 141. We're trying to get our numbers back to the 200 range where we were in the last couple of years, to make sure that we get the maximum benefits of our size from the Ontario Horticultural Association and OMAFRA. We will hold a rain barrel sale. That's something that we have the luxury of doing, and it will be a deliver to your home type of rain barrel sale, which is quite a nice proposition. The company that's producing these will be delivering them right to your door, dropping them off at your curb. The delivery date is sometime towards the end of May. You can order them online at rainbarrel.ca, and there you go to scroll down to the sales area, and it'll show you the clubs that are doing these drives, and look for Brooklyn Whitby Garden Club or Brooklyn Horticultural Society, and they'll have them there. And you can sign up, and everything is done online. You buy it online. There's no transactions take place after at the time of delivery, as we did the last time. So there are still lots of things available. You can order a number of different kinds of rain barrels and all of the accessories, but it is a prepaid only. Rain barrels, $65. You can't beat that right now with everyone trying to conserve and do things from home. So there's our newsletter and the history that we're really focused on. And what a fantastic job these folks did with the newsletter this year. This is just a page in the middle, trying to combine the new and the old with the current. I have to appreciate all the members that took part in it and submitted ideas and wrote some of their histories in place. Special thanks to Gordon Wick for the extensive history that he wrote, and for the 1970s, describing the civic beautification activities that took place in those years. And as you'll see as you go through the newsletter, some of the gaps obviously that we're missing. But great work for the newsletter team, Sherry Howard Mary Caddy, Barb Panawick, among many others. Those three in particular. So now with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sue Green. And I am assuming that Sue Green is online. And if so, Sue, it's going to be all yours.
Thanks, Hans. So on behalf of the Whitby and Bloom Committee, we'd like to thank the association to have this association with the Brooklyn Whitby Garden Club, and it's been great for the last few years, as you've said. So just a reminder to everybody that on Wednesday, April the 28th at 7:30, we have Conrad Richter talking about amazing herbs, so also online. And then on May the 26th, that's a Wednesday at 7:30, we were to have my nephew, Ben Cullen, but he is finding that his wife will be delivering a baby right at about that time. So he has talked his father, Mark Cullen, into being our speaker that evening. So for the May meeting, it's going to be Beyond Beefsteak, and that will be Mark Cullen. So moving along, it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Gellatly, and he's our guest speaker for this evening. So Paul sent a summary of what he has done and where he's been and what he's passionate about. And it appears the thread of all of this is a lifelong passion for horticulture. He has held positions in the Toronto Botanical Garden, the Toronto Zoo, and as a gardener at the city of Toronto. So let me just say that Toronto seems to be a thread in his life's work. With these positions, he's been able to expand his knowledge of plant species that thrive in the geographical area, invasive species, pollinator gardens, rare plants, daylilies, and tropical plants. Maybe I better go on video. But he's perhaps best known for his strong online presence as a tattooed gardener. With this in mind, I went to his site and found this review. I'm following a tattooed man down a garden path. Paul is the greatest, kindest, and most open-minded mentor I have ever had. Every day I learn something new from him on this page. He has tripled my plant collection and inspires me to keep my sense of wonder. Wow, that's quite a recommendation, Paul. Personally, I like the part where the writer says tripling my plant collection. That sounds exciting, but all kidding aside, I'll now turn it over to Paul. Go for it, Paul.
All right. Let me just make sure I get my slide presentation started here. Can everybody see that? Hopefully. I'd like to thank you all for welcoming me here tonight. I'm going to be talking about some of my top fives. I've been doing this for a long time. At the age of 16, I was actually director of the Waterloo Horticultural Society. So when we say it's a lifelong passion, it definitely is. So tips for today, if you have any questions that come on through my presentation, just enter them into the chat and we'll be able to answer those at the end of the conversation. So social media post reach of 10 million people a month. So what that means is that there's 10 million people sharing the posts that I put out. When I started the Tattooed Gardener, it was really just for a couple of friends who were asking me plant questions. I had no idea it was going to sort of snowball to what it is today. And I'm beyond happy with how things have gone. I try and take as much time as I can to answer any questions that come through to my social media links. I'll have them at the end. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to answer any questions you have. So a little bit more about me. I am the Regional Director of Horticulture for BC Rare Tropical Plants. Again, affiliated with Toronto Botanical Garden, Toronto Zoo, and City of Toronto. It's really all-encompassing. I'm very lucky to live a life surrounded by plants. And I start each day in plants and end each day in plants, and it's a pretty good life. This is what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about my garden, my home garden. I'm only renting, so I have a very small front garden. All of the photos you see, with the exception of the one on the screen now, are actually taken from my home garden. We're going to go through a number of different selections for top fives. I'm hoping you'll grab some of those and add them to your garden this year or next. At the very end, we'll talk a little bit about texture in the garden, because I think that's really the key to getting the most out of your garden. And at the end, we'll answer some questions. So this is my garden. It's north facing, and I've been here for 9 years. So it's a long-term rental. I'm not planning on going anywhere, because moving my garden is kind of a nightmare. But this is sort of what I have in my garden. I am a daylily hybridizer, so I do have 20 registrations with the American Hemerocallis Society, but my first love is really Japanese maples, and I think you'll see that in the garden. I have over 30 of them. So this is move-in day. This was October 31st, 9 years ago. I'm just going to quickly flip through these. This is just sort of a progression to show you where my top 5 lists were created. This is the garden the following spring. In the first year, I always recommend planting a lot of annuals. It really gives you the opportunity to test your sun. It gives you an opportunity to try out colors in a spot where you're not sure what you want, but you know you want something. So I play with heights, I play with colors, just in order to sort of learn how much light is there, what's the soil conditions, what's going to do well. So the first year, you can see that photo is pretty much all annuals. The next year, you see the perennials creeping in. You can see my first 6 daylilies across the front there. I now have over 400. So it really snowballed and definitely grew as a passion for me. What I love about this is that I'm actually using that pine tree, which is 3 houses away. My garden is really small, but what I've done is hidden the houses to make my property seem much larger than it actually is. I think that's a really good tip for people with smaller spaces, is that you can really utilize your vistas, whatever those happen to be, to make your garden seem bigger or create a bigger room. Now you can see there's very little grass left. I have exactly 1 grass path around the garden, and you'll see that in a couple of slides. It's exactly 1 lawnmower width wide. So it takes me longer to get the lawnmower out to go around the path than it does to actually mow the grass. The tree in the middle is a Paulownia. So it's a Royal Empress tree. It was never meant to grow big. It was actually supposed to die to the ground every year and have these giant satellite leaves and be super cool. But one year we had a mild winter, and now it's a 25-foot tall tree. And I think with the winter we just had, it's going to be covered in flowers this year. So I'm really looking forward to that. You see the tree starting to fill out in the middle. That tree was planted from a seed 8 years ago. So incredible growth rate on those. In the States, they're actually considered invasive. Here, our winters keep them in check. I really haven't noticed a lot of things happening as far as spreading. I am afraid to cut it down because I've heard if you do, it suckers. So I'm sort of keeping that one tree that I have. So again, using the vistas, this is taken from the corner of my property across on a diagonal. A lot of those hostas are no longer there. The garden is sort of constantly evolving and constantly changing. And I think with my top 5s and your top 5s, that should happen. You should sort of always be evolving. When I was growing up, there was an 89-year-old woman up the street, and I used to go up and walk her garden with her. And she said to me, she said, "Paul, I've been gardening for 75 years. She's like, you'd think I'd have it right by now. I still have tall stuff in the front. I still have short stuff behind it. I still have 2 things flowering at different times that don't match." She said, "I'm never getting it right." And she said, "That's what I love about gardening." And I think I've held that with me my entire life. I think it's every year is a new adventure in the garden. And I think that's a really good way to look at it. You can start to see the layering happening. This is the exact same shot as the last one on an angle diagonally across. You can see the Japanese maple starting to creep in. This is the overall design of the front yard garden. This is my entire garden, 30 feet by 40 feet. The grass path you can see, it's sort of, that path got narrower and narrower and narrower. It is as narrow as it can get now. So my garden is complete. The only other thing I could do is get rid of the grass altogether and do a flagstone path, which might give me a couple inches on each side. I don't think it's worth it. And I kind of like the grass I'm out there walking in my bare feet and doing some garden. So I do enjoy the grass. Canada 150 tulips. I decided in my infinite wisdom that I had room for about 500 of them. I totally didn't. But I squeezed them in. I think there's only about 8 left. The squirrels have sort of over the years taken them and planted them in the neighbors' properties and around. But they put on a really good show. I was talking to someone who owns Tradewinds International, and she said tulips are meant to be annuals for the most part. The species tulips are an exception to that. But when you get these big tulips, they're sort of grown for 5 or 6, 7 years in order to get that nice big bloom. And once that happens, they sort of peter out until they rebloom again. So I really took that advice when I went to the Toronto Botanical Gardens, and I started flipping over the tulips that are there. It gives an opportunity to sort of try some different colors and try a different shape, form, or a different combination. So when you sort of start to think about that, tulips are fairly inexpensive. So it's sort of a good way to do that and to try new things. Daylily bloom. So daylilies, I do an entire presentation on daylilies. I'm speaking at a couple of different places. Daylilies are one plant that I sort of have come to appreciate. They actually make me slow down and really appreciate the garden and spend time in the garden. These flowers only last one day. So if you don't walk around the garden that day and see them, you miss it. You miss that plant and everything it's trying to do. And you miss the combinations. There's never two alike, and the garden changes every day. So it really makes me sort of go out, walk around the garden, and enjoy it. I put a lot of work into it, and I think we all do. And that's something that I think we need to learn how to do more, is actually just slow down. I don't have to go out and work all the time. I can actually just go out and enjoy the garden. Because my garden's in the front yard, often neighbors are walking around my front yard too, which is totally fine. But it gets enjoyed by a lot of people. This is the photo that's in Tara Nolan's book, Gardening Your Front Yard. If you don't have that book yet, absolutely go and get it. Not just because my garden's in it, but there's a lot of really neat ideas for how to transform your front yard and make it sort of something that works for you. So this is last year in the spring, so 1 year ago, probably in a couple of weeks. The Japanese maples are just starting to leaf out. You can see how large the Peonia tree is now. And all those little white things that you see are actually my garden tags. Everything is labeled. I'm a little bit OCD about that in a good way. I think it just helps keep me organized. And as a hybridizer, I put all the information on it that I need. And this is that same photo looking from the porch down when you saw the actual design of the garden. This is what it looks like when it fills in. There's not a lot of space left. So keep this in mind as we go through our top 5 list. Real gardeners buy at least 10,000 plants in the course of a lifetime without having the least idea where they're going to put any of them when they get home. This is totally true. We all have a little corners where we squirrel away our plants that we've purchased. Keep doing that. I don't say no to myself very much, which is why I have a really full garden. But it really helps appreciate my garden and what I've been able to put in. I have very, very little space left. I have used every single inch of my garden. Underneath my Japanese maples, I have dwarf hosta collections. And I think what that does is actually cuts down on the work for me. There's very little weeding after the garden starts to fill in. And there's not as much watering as required because the ground is completely covered. So it works really well for me. I'm going to get into the top 5 lists. Top 5 rare and unusual plants. I like things that are different. I like things that not everybody has or that you can't just pick up at Home Depot or Costco. I want something that, somebody walks through my garden and goes, what is that? I think we all need those in our garden. So this is the first one, shredded umbrella plant, Synalesis Icontifolia. It is stunning. It is a part shade to shade plant. It is zone 4A to 8B, so it's hardy. When it comes through the ground, they look like little fuzzy aliens. They're hairy plants coming out of the ground, and then they go whomp, and their little umbrellas spread out. Absolutely amazing for texture. The variegated ones on the bottom is Synalesis Kiko. That one's tough to find, and you're going to pay some money for it when you do, but it is 100% worth it. That beautiful golden green variegation stays from spring all the way through. Beautiful plant if you can get your hands on it. Jeffersonia Dubia. Not as well known as it should be for what it does. It is a spring ephemeral. So it comes up in the spring, does its thing, and then disappears for the rest of the year. Comes out blood red. The foliage comes out of the ground red. And then on the same day, basically, all of these beautiful lavender flowers start to open up. And it really forms a nice little mat and is absolutely beautiful. That color stands out and catches your eye from across the garden. It's zone 6, so extra protection. I'm a zone pusher, self-admitted zone pusher. I have a monkey puzzle tree, I have the Paulownia, I have a crepe myrtle. I have things that have no business growing in our zones, and they do. And I'm a big advocate for trying something, because just when it says it's a zone 5 or 6, that's a guarantee. That doesn't mean that something in a higher or lower zone won't do well for you. You might have to give it a bit of extra protection. Diananthe Cerullia. This is one of my absolute favorite shade plants. The foliage on this is spectacular. It is big leaves, uniquely shaped. It's a member of the hydrangea family. And you look at that and go, oh, that doesn't look anything like that. If you'll notice the bottom left photo, there's a little flower hanging down, the bract. That's hydrangea. And that's really the only thing about it that has any similarities to that. Zone 4 or cooler, well-drained soil, part shade to shade. I have mine on the north side of my house. It gets absolutely no sun, and it does beautifully well. There's also a white flowering form as well. This one's becoming a little bit more mainstream, and I love that. There's a new cultivar called Redhead, I believe it is. I purchased it last year. I have this in 3 spots in my garden for a couple of reasons. The hummingbirds and butterflies love it. So as far as the pollinator goes, it's absolutely worth it. It grows in the sun, in the shade, in the part sun, in the part shade. It's not picky. And I've got it in all 3 locations, and it does equally as well. It's a long bloomer, an extended bloomer. So you really get quite a bit out of it for the plant that you have. Well behaved, 2 feet high, 2 feet wide max, and it just forms this nice little mat. I definitely recommend this one. And it's native to North America, and natives are important. This one, I love big leaves. I love big leaves. I love big flowers. Anything that sort of stops me in my tracks, I have to have. This was one of those plants. Zone 6 to 8, I've never covered it. I've never had any issues with it. I'm technically zone 6, so I'm on the edge. I would say you could easily go to a 5, little extra mulching without any problem. The leaves are huge. The leaves are, 1.5 feet, 2 feet wide, and there's 2 of them. You saw it in the first photo that I had. It definitely makes you stop. Top clematis. So clematis are something I have always loved. When I was a director of the Waterloo Horticultural Society, we had the woman that hybridized Jack Manion, and that's sort of the most common clematis around now. I don't have that one, but I have some others. Freckles is one that I have tried 2 or 3 times. Unfortunately, it has never wintered over for me, but it still makes my top 5. It is something I keep trying, and I'm trying in a different spot. I've discovered that, just because it didn't grow here doesn't mean 6 feet that way, it's not going to grow. And I have a number of plants like that. This one did make it through the winter this year. So, I'm hoping I found a spot. It's a late blooming clematis, and it's creamy with that maroon dot through it. I like anything with dots and streaks and stripes because every bloom is slightly different. And I think you appreciate them more when that's the case. So Raymond Everson is brilliant. His collection of clematis is absolutely amazing. And I would say most of mine are from him. I have clematis that actually climb through my Japanese maples and flower. So it makes it look like the Japanese maple is flowering. When I'm on a small postage stamp of a garden, I have to maximize it as much as I can. And I'm a plant collector, so I want to put as much in as I can. This one, Empress, is absolutely beautiful. The flowers are large. They have that really full middle and the nice daisy back. Absolutely stunning. Avant-garde. These ones are tiny, but there's a whole bunch of them. This one I have actually climbing through my purple ghost Japanese maple. And the leaves are just a little bit darker than these flowers are. So the flowers are a little bit lighter, and they literally cover the whole top of the Japanese maple. It's absolutely beautiful. People walk by and some people don't notice it at all. But the ones that do stop, back up, and take a whole bunch of photos. That's how you know you've done it right. This is one of my favorites. Crystal Fountain is spectacular. That color, that ice blue, it was launched at the 2002 Chelsea Flower Show. Hardy, zone 4 to 9. I have this on my obelisk, which was my Bell telephone side of the house, ugly telephone thing that they used to have. So I cut that off the building and made an obelisk, my ode to Bell. I have about 4 clematis on that, and they flower in succession. So what that does is it sort of extends the bloom. They're not all blooming at the same time, but it really extends the bloom in that area. This is a chance seedling from Jack Mannii. This is called tie-dye. I absolutely love this. Again, the streaks and stripes. I had a hard time finding this, and I finally sourced it at Phoenix Perennials in Richmond, BC. They do mail order. They ship across Canada, and highly recommend it. They have some beautiful clematis. This one is very hardy because it's from Jack Mannii. So, you know, it's very floriferous, it's very hardy, and it blooms consistently. This is Vianetta. Vianetta was a little hard for me initially, and I struggled whether I should put it on this list. I decided to because of the form. It doesn't look like a clematis, and it changes from the minute it opens to the minute it finishes. That center part opens up more and more and more and almost covers the white petals that are around it. So when you have them flowering at different times, it actually looks like there's different flowers on the same plant. And I think that's pretty cool. This is an honorable mention. I said it's my top 5. There's a 6th and sometimes a 7th added in. I couldn't do it. This one is a bush clematis. This one is called Sirius Black. That purple foliage, it comes out of the ground purple, and it stays that way right through till fall. It gets covered in these white, beautiful flowers in summer. So it's a summer flowering clematis. I purchase praying mantises every year, and I put the egg sacs around the garden as sort of a natural insect control. I put one on this plant, and when they hatch, they cover the whole thing, and then I sort of pick them off and move them around the garden. I like it because it's not a vine, so I don't need to have a support. I do have strong plants around it. It does tend to lean, so fair warning, you know, put some strong plants around it, or just be prepared to stake it with, you know, some bamboo stakes. We're going to go into the grasses. I've always loved grasses. I don't have a big garden for grasses. This is one that I will make room for in every garden I do, and every design I've ever done, I have included this grass. Hacanicloa macra. This is the gold variegated form. I have the all green species, and then I have Solar Flare, which is a newer cultivar. This one in particular holds a very special spot in my garden. It takes up a good 2 to 3 feet. And every year I plant the blue-eyed beauty osteospermum with it. It's a spectacular combination. You're going to see it a couple times through my photos. You'll understand why I love it so much. Pink muley grass. This is cotton candy grass, it's called. This one is amazing if we have an extended fall. It is very, very late to start. But if we get that extended fall, which more often than not we do, you get this beautiful pink wispy, you know, seed pods to it. I love it. I think it should be used more. It's hardy, it's drought resistant, and it's great fall interest. Sky Racer. This one is no longer in my garden, but it will be again when I have a bigger garden. What I love about this is that the grass part itself is very compact. It's very close to the ground, about a foot and a half up solid, but then it shoots up and it has these beautiful wispy, airy seed heads that go 6 feet in the air, you know, 7 feet in some cases. What it does is it provides form and shape without being heavy, without it being a wall. You can sort of see it in that top left picture. It's just wispy, you can see through it. So it gives you that sort of feeling of what's over there. And if you have a garden where you can extend it past that, it creates a little sense of intrigue and a sense of wonder. And I think that's, you know, something that we really want to do in our garden. Rooster Carrots. This one is not hardy. However, it has wintered over for me for 5 years in a row without problems. I did have 4 of these, and they looked the same every year. And I wasn't sure if they were alive or dead. They're brown. I was like, who knows? One year I cut them to the ground just to see what would happen. It turns out 2 of them were actually dead. I don't know, they could have been dead for 3 years. They still looked exactly the same. 2 of them, however, flushed back out again and are still in my garden. This is a beautiful container plant. It is absolutely spectacular in this beautiful sort of burgundy brown that you can sort of play with those hues and those tones in your planters. And it has a really nice form. It's a very vase shaped, it gets these little odd curly cues that goes around that you can have a lot of fun with. I am really a fan of New Zealand and Australia plants. I don't know why. I've never been there. There's no reason for me to. I just love them. Standing ovation. So these are stunning in the fall. They're not great the rest of the year, I'll be honest. They are bluish tinge, which is nice to play with. But in the fall, you get purples and oranges and reds and greens and blues. Every color in the world comes out of this grass in the fall. So I have a few of them, different cultivars. They're all similar with just different fall colors to them. So you can sort of play with that. I love this grass. It's well behaved. It's super hardy. Zone 3 to 8, 3 to 4 feet tall, 1 feet wide. Definitely a good one to consider. We're going to go into shade texture plants. I'm actually doing a talk on shade plants on Saturday at the Milton CD Saturday, and I've never done a shade garden talk. And it's called Shady Business. Check it out. I love shade gardening, and that was a huge surprise to me. The textures you can get are phenomenal, and the leaves, and the leaf shape and everything. I love it. I in some ways better than sun gardening. This is one of my favorites, the Jersey Hercules. Now, all of the Jerseys are nice. I have probably 6 or 7 of them. Hercules is huge. And again, it goes back to those big leaves. Zone 4, beautiful flower. You'll see a photo of the flower later. It looks like a white firework that goes off in the shade. Stunning. Definitely one to consider and really good companion for hostas. Aurelia Sun King. I had to be sold on this, and I don't know why, because it's become one of my favorites. This thing comes out of the ground chartreuse green, and it stays chartreuse green until the fall when the frost hits it and it goes into the ground again. In a really dark corner, it's like a light. It shines. It is right up against the house in the darkest corner of my garden, and it draws your eye back. It gives light from the back. I have seen this get 4 to 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It's a wall. It doesn't do quite that well here, and I'm guessing it's just because it's so dark where it is, but it's still worth having. It gets little black berries in the fall. The birds like it, so there's interest there. It hasn't been in the industry very long. It came over from Japan maybe 8 or 9 years ago. So definitely one to look for if you have a shade garden. Japanese painted ferns. I love them all. I have them all. This one is awesome. Godzilla. So Godzilla, the leaves get 3, 4, 5 feet wide, and they wind through the garden. So you get this super cool silver leaf with a purple midrib, so you can play with that purple subtle leaf with other plants that you plant with it. But what I love is just it's meandering through, and it's one leaf is huge and sort of winds through the garden. Absolutely spectacular, non-obtrusive, and really gives you sort of that pop of silver. Hellebores. I have about 20, I think now. I hated them. I'll be honest. I did not like them until I started working at Plant World. And Paul Zammit, who we all know Paul, got me hooked. He did. And this is my favorite. This is called the Painted Doubles series. The only thing I don't like is their tendency to sort of face down. So you have to sort of pick them up to get a good photo. But when they get a whole bunch of flowers, they're spectacular. And they are evergreen. There's a million reasons I love them now. If you haven't got one, do yourself a favor and go pick one up. They're early spring. Mine are just about to flower in the garden here. And Mutgenia. So this is actually a cross between Virginia and Mutgenia. It's an intergeneric cross, and it took the best of both parents. It's got thick, waxy leaves. They turn scarlet red in the fall, and it's got really pretty pink, dainty flowers. It's very well behaved. It doesn't run. It stays in its spot, and it's sort of it's got a rhizome, so it sort of will spread a little bit, but very well behaved. going to talk about annuals quickly. Annuals are something that I add to my garden every year. I always find a spot. I always pick a spot and I put a couple in. Petunia Bee's Knees. This is out of Ball Floral. This is a multiple award winner for a reason. I'm not a huge Petunia fan, never have been until I saw this. It is the most saturated yellow petunia on the market by far. I've seen it beside others and it glows. It's floriferous, it's well behaved. I've seen it in planters, I've seen it in the ground. Highly recommend it. It will be all over the market this year. That is the color of the year this year, is that sort of yellow. So definitely one to watch for. Cosmo Cupcake series. I grew these at the Toronto Zoo a couple of years ago. They are tall. They're a wonderful backdrop plant. The flowers are large and they look just like a cupcake wrapper. It's amazing. And they come in pinks and whites and light pinks and dark pinks, and they're all in that sort of zone. They are stunning and they bloom nonstop. So definitely easy to grow from seed. So if you can pick up some seed, you still got time to get them in now. Definitely recommend it. Another Australian plant. You had to know they were going to come around. So this one's called Joey. This one I've grown it for a couple of years in my garden. It's not easy to find, but Ball has picked it up. So I'm hoping it will become a little bit more out there. Drought resistant, flowers like crazy, and the plumes last for ages. So it really is a good annual. One I'm sort of known for. This is Poppy Drama Queen. And I tried 4 or 5 different times before I got the actual Drama Queen. And it's the only poppy I grow of the somniferums because I don't want them to cross-pollinate. If you get a bunch of different kinds, you end up with a whole bunch of muddy seedlings. So I get these consistently every year. What I love about these is they're a pollinator magnet. They're short-lived, so they come up, they do their thing, they reseed, and they're gone. So they're really good with my daylilies. They pop up in between them, and then they do their thing before the daylilies really flower, and then they're gone. I collect seeds from these every year, and I put them in the fridge. I never have to. These always pop up around the garden. I like that. I like that every year I'm not sure where they're going to show up, and they put them in places that I wouldn't necessarily have planted them, but they work. And I like that. It's sort of that mystery. Portulaca Colorblast Double Guava. I have to have this year. I've seen it in trials. I've seen it in pots. I've seen it in the ground. It is so cool. It has got a weird shaped flower. It's got such a beautiful contrast. It's spectacular on mass. This is another ball floral. And I would say, if you find this, grab a few and let me know where you get them, because this one does have to be in my garden this year. Season extending perennials. So our winters are becoming less wintry. We're getting, warmer, mild temperatures. We're not getting snow until January. I have things in my garden that bloom into December, and then I have things that start in February. So really the only month I don't have stuff is January. And if we don't have a lot of snow like this year, I've still got things that look good. And I think your garden really doesn't reach its full potential until you've got all 4 seasons that you can put a check mark on. This is Euphorbia Row Bi. This one is a runner. So fair warning, it does pop up, but I think it's worth it. It's got glossy green leaves. They stay that green all winter. So they're poking through the snow, that color green. By now, they're turning a little brown and they're a little weathered. So I cut them all off now, and then they flush all back out with new growth, and that goes into next year. Metallicum. So these, if you have a ravine lot, I would not recommend these. They can become a little bit invasive, but not terribly. What I do to do that is I actually remove the seeds before they fall and before the animals get them. So I'm actually sort of being responsible with them. They're beautiful though. They put out fresh foliage in the fall, all winter, just like that, the leaves are sticking through the snow. And a few of them ended up going mushy, and now they're flushing out a brand new set for this year. They have beautiful big flowers, green spathes, absolutely stunning. And then they get these candles of really pretty fall seeds. So it's sort of that checks all those, 4 seasons of interest. Blue bunny carex. Carex is a great grass because it is winter evergreen. So I have these under my Japanese maples. And when we have no snow, I have these beautiful silhouettes of the form of the Japanese maple, which in the winter is what you're looking at. And then underneath, I've got little mats of different colored carex. Some are more well-behaved than others. This is a particularly well-behaved one. This sort of stays in its clump. Occasionally, I get a baby that pops up around the garden somewhere, but they really are well-behaved. I definitely recommend it. That blue color is spectacular. Hellebores snow fever. I do not recommend this one if you're all about the flowers. This one has not flowered for me in 8 years. It is flowering for me this year. This is different. It's a different variety of hellebore than all of the others that we talked about earlier. This is more like the stinking hellebore, so more of the species, but a variegated form. I did cover it this year with a rose cover, and it's about to flower. So I think I figured out the trick, which I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. But this variegated foliage is spectacular. People come to my garden and they walk right around. They're like, what is that? Because it's in the shade and it's white and it's crisp and it stays that way from beginning to end. So it's a really good one for foliage. Fuchsia, we all know them. There are tons. They're coming out with new ones every year. The new ones don't last. The new ones are sort of, they come and go really quickly in the garden. And in some ways that's good because you can try different things. But as far as stay power goes, some of them are better than others. Delta Dawn, which is the one right in the middle, that sort of orangey burgundy center with the chartreusey edge, that one has stay power. And that's one of the reasons that it is one of my favorites. Super Zone Hardy. Again, we want ones that are going to do okay in a cottage or in a zone 3. I do talks in Edmonton. I do talks in Halifax. So I added these in because I think we all want something that is guaranteed to do well. These are all from Phoenix Perennials. So they actually have a section in their catalog of Super Zone Hardy perennials. So if you're not sure and you want to try something that you know is going to work, check it out. Monkshood we all know. But what we don't necessarily know are the varied colors that they're available in. The stainless steel silver, the pink, the white, the purple, the bicolor. And they have slightly different, there's even yellow. They have slightly different flowering times. So you can really, if you can play with them and get them going, you can have a really extended bloom out of monkshood. Astavoides. I love this thing. It loves damp soil. So at the bottom of a drain spout or somewhere where you've got some clay soil, I have a ditch in the front in Port Credit where they sort of fill with water when it rains. It loves it. But this gives you those nice big leaves, beautiful lollipop flowers first thing in the spring, about 2 to 3 feet tall. So they're a really nice height and they're really good with the carex grasses. You know, you sort of balance those giant leaves with the strappy thin of the, of the grass and then the big ones of the Astavoides. Estrancha. I didn't like these until I started taking pictures of them. And then I realized how amazing they photograph. I now have an Estrancha collection. I have about 15, I think, in my shade garden. When they all start to flower and they're slightly different hues and different colors and different tones, I've got some variegated ones. What's happening now is that the bees are pollinating them and I'm getting seedlings pop up and they're actually hybrids of all of the different cultivars. They're really nice. They're extended bloomers. Some of them rebloom. They're dainty. Perfect shade plant in my opinion. Colchium, so the autumn crocus. I put these in because they are super zone hardy. They're deer resistant, which a lot of people have issues with. I have a love-hate with these. When these start to flower, it means that the year is over and the gardening season's wrapping up. I don't like that so much. But I do love that they look spectacular. And these are a double form. They do carpet, like you can see them. They start to sort of spread. You'll get a nice patch of 5, 6, 7, 10 flowers popping up, which extends it a little bit. Their spring, they send up all their leaves in the spring, are not great. And they take up a ton of room. Like they're big and they're kind of ugly, I'll be honest. But they're worth it for the fall. So you do that trade-off. I trade off a little bit of my spring garden so that I can have that extended fall garden. Sanguisorba. So I didn't have a lot of experience with this until I got to the TBG. And Paul Zammit loves these. Pete Udolph loves these. So I was like, hey, those are two people that I respect. I'm gonna try it out. I love them now. The birds hang off of these flowers when they're finished and eat the seeds. If you're sort of out in the garden first thing in the morning, there's still some fog around, you know, you've got dew hanging on everything. There's 50 to 100 goldfinches all hanging on these seed pods all over the garden, eating all the seed. So I think that's important, right? We need to sort of, our garden has purpose outside of just being beautiful. This is one of those plants. It does tend to flop. Peonies. We're talking about peonies. I love peonies. You're going to see what I love in peonies because they all look the same for the most part. So I really like when you can see the center. When you can see that yellow, that's what the bees are going to, that's what the pollinators are going to. When you have these tight doubles, you don't see that. These ones are sort of wide open. When they're a semi-double like this, they don't flop. So I don't have to stake them very much. The odd one I do, but really, for the most part, I don't. This is Circus, which is red. Again, you'll see my streaks that I love. What I like about this, though, is that emergent spring foliage is burnt red. It's burgundy when this thing comes out of the ground, which I think is why they call it a circus, because it's so much fun. Like, everybody should go to the circus. Everybody should have this in their garden. Green halo. I love green flowers. That's another one of my weird little things. This one is stunning. The flowers are smaller, but there's more of them. So you trade off that nice big bloom for smaller ones with some really pretty green. They photograph really well. They've got that center. They don't need to be staked. Another really good one, pollinator friendly. They're slightly fragrant. So they're, you know, you're not getting that nose full of smell that you do with some of them. This is the only double that I have in the presentation. This is Kieran Maru. Every bloom is different. Some are more streaked than others. It does need to be staked. And I have a feeling this one may end up getting pulled from my garden this year. I'm trying to get away from ones that I have to do too much maintenance with, and I find staking to be something that I don't really want to do. This is Pink Spritzer. So this looks very much like Circus, but it's pink and white instead of that red and white. Other than that, they're identical. If you can only have one peony, if your garden is small, or if you just only want to commit space for one, it is this one. It is Peony Miss America. Hands down, the best peony I have in my garden. The blooms are huge. They're semi-double. They're super fragrant. So make sure you put it near a pathway so that when you walk by it, you can actually enjoy that. It is older. I think it was hybridized in the late 60s, early 70s. It is still the peony that they judge all other semi-double peonies against. And for a peony 40 to 50 years later to still be the standard that others are being compared to says something. Can't say enough good things about this peony. And the honorable mention, I told you I had a few. Claire de Lune is the single on the left. It is the first peony out in my garden. They are singles. They look like little fried eggs. They are beautiful. The pollinators love them. And the one on the right is Shimonashiki. So that's a tree peony. And if you buy this not in bloom, 9 times out of 10, it is going to turn out a pinky color with no streak and no white and no nothing. I have planted 4 of these, not in bloom, and every single one turned out pink with no striping. I had to wait until I saw one flowering at a garden center that my fiance works at, and I grabbed it. I was so excited. They say that the pink ones will turn that. They don't. So do yourself a favor. If you love this one, wait until you find one just about to open in a garden center and look at that bud. And if you see some white on there, grab it. Native plants. I think native plants are really important, and we need to be adding those to our garden at all times. I have them throughout my entire garden. This is one I really like. This is Monarda punctata, or spotted bee balm. It's a short-lived perennial biennial. It attracts tons of pollinators, in particular a predatory wasp that controls grubs and bad caterpillars and other insects. So when you plant a plant that's going to attract something that's going to get rid of grubs, you don't have to use chemicals. And I think that's so important, aside from all of the other advantages to natives. That's something to keep in mind. Prairie Smoke, Geum triflorum. This one has great winter interest. It's a semi-evergreen. I took some pictures this morning, actually, of the foliage. It's native to a very broad area of Canada. It's amazing, actually. It produces both nectar and pollen. So it's good by bumblebees and sweet peas. And it's hardy to zone 4 to 9. It gets these beautiful little puff seed pods that look like smoke, which is why they call it the Prairie Smoke. Great, great, great native. Allium cernum, or the noting onion. This one's actually edible. I've never eaten it, but it is. I find this to be a really good companion plant to the daylilies. So this one sort of, they node down and then they get these beautiful pink and white flowers and they sort of start to stand up a little bit. They bloom July, August, so great bloom time. Tons of pollinators are all over this thing. And it sort of spreads by seed and the clump will spread, but not invasively. It's very easy to sort of dot around the garden and it takes up very little space. So you can really tuck it into some areas around the garden and they make really pretty photos around larger flowers. Hepatica is probably my favorite. I think this was the first native plant I ever bought when I went to a garden center. I fell in love with the leaf. It's got this really cool trilobe leaf. They're small, they're compact. In the core woods at the Toronto Zoo, the lower core woods that not a lot of people get to see, there is a carpet of these in the spring. And to walk into a forest that's healthy and to see a carpet of Hepatica blooming in the spring, it literally took my breath away. It was absolutely beautiful. I have about 15 of them around my garden. They're early flowering. April, they come out and they come out of the ground and flower and then the leaves come up. So definitely one to look at. They go in shades from lavender to white. They're all sort of slightly different. So you can sort of play around with that. The yellow trillium. I love trilliums. I have about 7 different varieties in my garden. This one I really love. It's got a beautiful mottled foliage. It won the Garden Merit Award from the Royal Horticultural Society, which I think is fantastic. That speaks to sort of the longevity and the strength of that plant. It's known to be found in tiny pockets in Ontario and then more down in the States, but it is native to small pockets in Ontario. It's one that I think everybody should have just for the leaves alone. I'm going to talk about Japanese maples. I talked about they are my love, and I love them all. I have layered them. I have some small, I have some big, I have some white, I have some pink. They come in everything. And I'm going to talk about 5, maybe 6. This is one of them. So this is Acer. I'm not even going to try and say it. Aureum. It's a full moon maple is the common name. I butcher it every time I say the Latin. It is spectacular in a part sun location. If it gets any afternoon sun, it will burn and it will look crappy and you will hate it. I moved this plant 3 times in my garden until I found the right spot, and now it's one of my favorites. Again, that chartreusey color and the fall foliage is beautiful on this. If you have a tiny garden, if you have a balcony, if you have a terrace, if you have a little corner in a garden and you don't know what to put in, this is your maple. This is one of the top 3 in the world for bonsai. So this one is very compact. It only grows 2 inches a year. I think it's tiny. It's very slow growing. Leaves are tight together. Never needs to be pruned. It does its own cool little gnarly growing, and each one is unique and has its own form and its own personality. Love it. The fall color is yellow. Each Japanese maple has a different color in the fall. And I think that's, they come out beautiful in the spring. They have beautiful leaves in the summer. Fall color is what they're all about. And then their form in the winter standing through the snow, spectacular. All 4 seasons, check. This is probably the most commented on maple during the summer in my garden. It is Floating Cloud or Yukagomo. It again needs the afternoon shade. It will burn, but it comes out almost white in the spring. Hues of pink to it are spectacular, and little tiny dots of green. And it keeps that for pretty much the whole year. What you do trade off on this one though is the fall color. It's not as spectacular as the others because really only the green dots change color. The rest sort of fades off. So definitely one, if you're more in your garden in the summer, this is the one you want. If you want that fall color, not the one you want. this is the one you want for fall color. So this one was a surprise to me. I bought this one on a whim. It was a impulse buy. Didn't really love it, to be honest. The leaves are massive. The leaves are about the size of my hand, and I have big hands, which is why I bought it. In the summer, the new growth has just a tinge of orange and yellow and red to it. In the fall, on the right, you can see it is like a fire in the garden. It goes orange and purple and red and yellow, like it has literally every color in it. And it changes every day. Like it morphs into different colors. People have stopped their car, walked into my garden to take a photo of the tag to find out what this maple is. It would get big if I let it. So scale is really important in my garden. So I keep things in check. I think a big specimen of this would be absolutely amazing. This is, bar none, my favorite. If you're gonna have one Japanese maple, this is the one you have to have. I have used this in every single landscape design I have ever done. This is sort of my token maple. This is called Koto no Ito, and this is the harp string Japanese maple. It has very, very narrow leaves. They're almost little straps. And when the wind catches it, it's just like fringe. It literally, the whole tree vibrates. And in the fall, it gets beautiful tones of orange and yellow and red, and it sort of transitions. It goes from one to the next until the leaves fall off. Beautiful form. Very little pruning required. It has a very prominent spot in my garden. And there's the prominent spot. I did an article for the Trellis magazine for Toronto Botanical Gardens. Google it. It was on Japanese maples. These are leaves from my garden. These are all the different shapes and textures and sizes and colors of the leaves. The article was a summer article. So this was, sort of what their summer color was. Fascinating. I want you to think about creating your own top 5 list. We all have friends that come over to our gardens and they're, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know which plants to get. Creating your own top 5 list is kind of fun. And it gives your friends a shopping list when they go to the nursery. Update them all the time. They're constantly evolving. You're buying a new plant and it might overtake an older plant that you had, and this is the new one that you want to talk about. Ensure that the plants you have experience with, just because you've seen it somewhere else, wait until you've actually grown it, because everyone has different experiences with different plants. Constantly evolving. New plants come out every year. A lot of people are overwhelmed. When I worked at Plant World in the perennial department, the amount of people that would stand in an aisle and they all had the same look on their face, and it was pure overwhelmedness. They're just standing there and they don't know which one to buy. These lists can really help with that. Newer isn't always better. Some of my favorite plants are older cultivars, especially in the roses. I have Tropicana, I have Double Delight. They're the old roses and they still smell. They still have the fragrance to them, which is why I love roses. Always include native plants. Always, always, always. We all have to do our part in this, and that's something that I think is a little thing that we can all do. Consider those 4 seasons of interest and give your friends the basic requirements. What's it going to take to grow this and have it do well for them? I want you to consider color. When you look at this tulip, most people bought it for that red color. I didn't. I bought it for that blue center. And what did I highlight that with? The grape hyacinths. What I did was pulled out the subtle accents in a flower, and it makes you look at it differently. It makes you appreciate the flower for way more than just a passing moment. It's all about the subtle. It's all about the subtleness. Here you've got the Estrancha, Princess Fabiana, and you've got Mrs. Pollock Pelargonium. The flower on that Pelargonium is hideous. It is orange. It doesn't match anything. It looks awful. And I cut every single one of them off. Don't feel bad doing that. I grow that plant for the foliage, and the foliage is one of my favorite Pelargoniums. And then I've tied it into the yellow of the sedum below. It highlights the yellow of the Pelargonium and the center of the Alstroemeria. Awesome, awesome. Play with those subtle hints. This was intentional. I love variegated ginkgos. I have 7 of them in my garden. You can see this is Beijing gold. It has a beautiful white tip that sort of streaks down into the leaf. And behind it is Hosta Liberty, which is a spectacular hosta. They're very similar, but different. And these plants are about 6 feet apart, maybe 5 feet apart. But when you get the photo and when somebody walks by and sees it, when I see it, I go, it gives me comfort. It's sort of one of those things where it really works well together. This is Acer Red Dragon with Tulip Shirley. They have a very similar purpley red tone to them, and they would not pop if it wasn't for the Angelonia sedum behind them. They're dark. You wouldn't appreciate them. But when you have that bright light behind them, they both shine. You know, when you have company over, you vacuum your house, you dust the table, you make sure everything looks good. The garden is the same. You want to show it off the best of its ability. Show off the highlight of the plants that you really want people to see. Always consider, I love variegation. Most of my houseplants, I have 700 houseplants in my collection, are variegated. I love it, but you can have too much in the garden. You've really got to use it smart. Here you've got the Sun King Aurelia, and you've got the variegated porcelain berry. They accent each other, and they work really well. What you don't see is that on the other side of that rock, I've got an Astilbe that is the exact color of the red in the stem of the porcelain berry. It just accents all of these things and pulls them out. This is a 2-foot section in my garden in the shade. There's no flowers there, and it's just as exciting. Don't get too caught up on always having to have the flowers. Sometimes the texture alone, you can see the hellebore in the middle of that, the tiger eye sumac to the top. Inabe shidare is the Japanese maple there. Texture can be achieved on a small scale and a large scale. This is only about 2 feet in my garden. It's got, you know, that grass that I talked about earlier. It's got lamb's ears in the front, and it's got Manyo no Sato. That's a variegated Japanese maple, so it's got green and maroon. What that means in the fall is 2 different colors that come out of it. So what that does is it sort of intensifies your enjoyment of that plant in the fall. And then it's got narcissus foliage in the back as a sort of a wall in this photo. Right plant, right place at all times. Learn your garden, you know, use your tropicals. You know, you can see the banana here. I knew I wanted height there. I knew I wanted color, and I knew I wanted something with form, but I didn't know what it was. So for about 4 years, there was a banana that lived there, and I loved it. And it gave the garden some tropical flair in the summer. It now has a Phoenix maple, and it has the red candy stripe bark in the winter, about the same height as the banana, and a beautiful yellow foliage in the fall. But using tropicals is a really good way to sort of add some interest to your garden. Scale is easy to maintain. You got to prune. You got to keep everything looking good. And every plant needs its place. I added this photo because of the Albizia on the left, which is that purple foliage tree. It is a zone pusher, and it's spectacular. The flowers on that are awesome. But on the right, the garden on the right, each of those plants in that garden fits together like a puzzle. They're not over impeding each other. They're not outshining each other. They just sort of work. And when you can stand back, blur your eyes a little bit, it's a continuous flow. And I think that's really, really important in a garden. And when you don't have it right, change it. Capture your garden in moments. I go out, I start my sunrise, I'm in the garden, sunset, I'm in the garden, and everywhere in between, I do what I can. The garden changes and it constantly evolves. And there are pollinators that visit that you didn't even know were there. Take lots of photos. That's how I get through the winter, is sort of looking through the garden and seeing where I want to change something, seeing where something didn't work for me. You know, from July 2nd to July 17th, there was a hole in the garden right there. There was no color, there was no form, no interest. And then I changed that. That's what I work on this year. And then hopefully you sort of constantly evolve that garden. You can see the banana went from red to green, but it's still there. The other thing you'll notice in here, I actually tuck my houseplants into the garden for the most part, because Mother Nature takes a better care of them in the summer than I do. They just do well out in the garden. So tuck your houseplants in, tuck them around the garden. You know, it sort of fills in the garden. Mother Nature takes care of it. You have to make sure they get watered because they do dry out faster than the garden around them. Don't be afraid to change your plants. So when I say that, You can see the Hacanacloa macra in the front. There's the Miletus melissophyllum. The common name is bastard balm, which is why I bought it, because I just thought that was the funnest name of a plant. I stripped the leaves off the front of this plant because those flowers are all hidden in the crooks of the leaves. And if I want to enjoy that plant, and if I want to watch the bees go at it, which they do, I take all the leaves off the front of that plant. And it really showcases the best of that plant. And I think some people are so afraid to do things like that, and you don't need to be. This plant I've had for 10 years, it hasn't affected it at all. There's the Regersia, and you can see the blue-eyed beauty poking through. So I use that in planters and in the garden. There's the firework white flower that I mentioned earlier on the Hercules. It's stunning. I mean, Regersia has a beautiful flower anyways, but they're not all like this. Play with shadows. I planted lotus. I have a pond just to grow the lotus. That's the only reason I have a pond. When the sun catches it from different directions, different images are put on the leaf. It's almost like a painter's palette. And I love that. I really take a lot of pride standing out there and watching the different things that are on there. Just wrapping up now, a couple more slides. I wanted to let everyone know where to find things, because people always ask me, where can you get this? Where did you get that? These are my go-to places. So each one has a different specialization. Lost Horizons, I am hoping is still open again this year. He's trying to find a buyer. I wanted to buy it, fell through, investors, all sorts of fun stuff. When I heard in the fall, I think someone was working on buying it in the fall. Perennials, unusual perennials, fantastic stuff you've never seen before. A lot of spring ephemerals. Vineland Nurseries is down towards Niagara, absolutely worth the drive. When I went there the first time, it was one of those start the car. It was like the prices were amazing. And the selection is awesome. So that's where you go for your Japanese maples, for your unusual trees. I actually bought a Franklinia there this year that I'm hoping has made it through the winter. Vandermeer's is down at your end of town. It's a good all-around general garden center. Whenever I go there, I spend money. And to me, that's a sign of a good garden center. Color Paradise in Mannheim. This is one that most of you will not know. It is just outside of Waterloo, and it is where I buy all of my annuals. They are spectacular. They grow them well. They have selection better than I have ever seen before. They have some unusual stuff, and the pricing is fantastic. Take a drive down, grab a couple of your friends, go down, absolutely worth it. Harper's and Ancaster, similar to Vandermeer's, a lot of general garden center, good thing to go. Whistling Gardens, I'm sure most of you know, is North America's largest conifer collection on display, and he has a little garden center attached. And then Phoenix Perennials is the one I mentioned that does mail order across Canada. If you haven't checked out what Gary has, hop on. It's absolutely worth it. I like big flowers. I like big leaves. That's the lotus on the left, and Brugmansia Mrs. Chambers on the right. Excuse me. That's Peony Miss America on the left, and Hibiscus Grape Galaxy on the right. We can't talk about big flowers without a couple of photos of that. To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. Thank you. My voice is now given out. Thank you for walking down the path of horticulture with me. And you can find me this weekend at Milton CD Saturday, the Tattooed Garden Virtual Garden Series on Sunday, and I'm on a podcast with Frankie Perugini and Amanda Weldon next Wednesday. There's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions at any time. And that is my presentation.
Thank you, Paul. Terrific job. Terrific.
Hans, we have a few questions that have come in if Paul has time to answer those.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to, from Suzanne in our group, how do you manage planting things so close together without disturbing the roots of the other plants that are already there? Is it possible to crowd the plants too much?
Absolutely. I think it's an art. You sort of, whenever I bring new plants home now, I sort of tell my whole garden to take a deep breath in. And when they do, I tuck plants around when they're not looking. I think it's sort of one of those things where you learn plants will sort of overtake each other if they're aggressive. So I put all my aggressive plants together and I let them battle it out. And at the end of the day, the ones that do well are the ones you want. I think the time of year that you put things in makes a big difference. I dig up all of my daylilies every year. And I do that because I only want 1 or 2 fans because I want to maximize how much I can have in my garden. So when I do that, I'll actually tuck things around it while I go. You don't have to worry too much about the roots, to be honest. As long as you're not doing major excavating, like not digging a giant hole, you don't damage that much of them. I tend to buy smaller plants because I like watching them grow. And when you're tucking a smaller plant in, you do less damage.
Okay, great. A couple more are coming in here. One about, are praying mantis predators to hummingbirds? And there's a second question, the same lady, is Plant World coming back? So
Plant World is not coming back, unfortunately. They have retired, I believe, and it's sad because they were a really good garden center. I know they had a couple irons in the fire. They were looking at a couple of different properties. So I wouldn't say forever that they're gone, but at least for the time being, they're gone. Are they predatory to hummingbirds? They're general predators. I have had them in my garden for 8 years. I buy them every year. I have never seen a hummingbird get even close to having any issues with them. In the States, there are videos of praying mantises going after hummingbirds. Those tend to be in the States. Those tend to be where your season is extra long. And you'll see one hummingbird that got gotten out of, imagine how many praying mantises and hummingbirds there are. A lot of people have that concern. I honestly have never seen it, and they do much more good than they do damage in my garden. I have no aphids. They were even eating the Japanese beetles last year, which for me was amazing. So I would say try it out. It's really such a low risk, and they're absolutely worth it. The benefits outweigh the risks.
great. I have about 5 more questions here I'll try and get to. Can you tell us about some of your favorite ground cover plants?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have a lot of ground cover because I find it takes up too much space. I do love Lamium. I think Lamium is absolutely beautiful. It gets beautiful flowers. It's lighter, so things can still come through it. I love Pachysandra, but not the typical. I like the variegated, and I like there's a form out that's shiny, shiny leaves. Love that. I do not recommend periwinkle because it is becoming invasive. And I love sweet woodruff. I have sweet woodruff dotted around some of my hostas, and it's absolutely beautiful. The fragrance is wonderful.
We have someone that just loved your garden, and they were wondering if it was open for visitors and tours.
Yeah, absolutely. I live in Port Credit, so I'm in the south end of Mississauga, and I'm actually going to be doing garden days this year. So I will actually be inviting people on specific days and specific times in order to, with COVID, I want to make sure I can sort of slot people in, but I'm definitely going to be doing garden days this year. I'm going to do it during the daylily season. And then again, probably in the fall when the Japanese maples come to their best.
That's great. Maybe before we leave at the end, someone's asking if you could put your contact info back on the screen.
Yes, I think it should be up. It should be up now.
It
I think.
It is.
Wonderful.
Perfect. Okay. Do you put your orchids outside in the summer?
I absolutely do. And they do fantastic. I keep them in the shade. So I keep them on the very north-hand side of the house. And I put up little bamboo racks and I set them all out there. And some of them I leave out until October. And I think that's sort of what clicks them into flowering.
Great. We did have somebody ask, the presentation has been recorded. I just want to let everyone know, and it will be posted on the Whitby and Bloom website. So whitby.ca/Whitby and Bloom, where you registered. We will post the video after. So there were a few questions. I just wanted to let everyone know. Okay, here's another one. I love the purple fountain grass and the perennial bear's breeches, but I've had trouble growing both. They never seem to take hold. Do you have any recommendations for growing these?
The purple fountain grass I have also not had luck with, so I treat it as an annual. The bear's breeches I finally had luck with. I would say try it in a few different spots. Once it gets established, I actually have seedlings popping up around the garden now. So there are different varieties of bear's breeches. So find the hardiest one, and it's not the spiny one. And and try it in different spots. You know, I think that's a key for me. I grow the Himalayan blue poppy as well. And I tried it for years, 5 years. I treated it as an annual. And I finally found the spot in my garden that it's come back. So don't be afraid if you've had no luck with it once, try it again in a different spot.
Great. I have a few questions here about where you get your praying mantis and ladybugs.
So I get them from Natural Insect Control, which is NIC, and they actually mail them to your house, which is wonderful. They're a great company, reputable. We use them at the zoo for our greenhouse beneficials as well. And I've had a lot of luck with the praying mantises I've gotten from them.
Okay. I have 4 left. They're quick ones. Is it too late to split Hellebores this year?
Yes, they're coming into bloom now, so you don't want to split them now. I would do it after they bloom. So once they sort of finish up and they're starting to put out their leaves, that's when I would move them. Otherwise, you'll lose your flowers for this year.
Okay, and what are the conditions for growing fern Godzilla?
Part sun, and that's pretty much it. They're actually just like any of the Japanese painted ferns. They just like, you know, that morning sun is ideal. Some moisture, but not you know, a ridiculous amount. And it's done very well for me. I've got it in a few spots in my garden.
And the last 2 questions about your favorite Japanese maples. The first one is, I also love Japanese maples and would love to buy one. I've heard they are also a favorite of the Japanese beetle, which I get quite a bit of from my neighbor's neglected garden. Do they really like the maples?
I have not found them to go on the Japanese maples, to be honest. I have a few that go on the bloodgood, but for the most part, they leave the others alone. The best thing to do is buy a pheromone trap for the Japanese maple and give it to your neighbor. They're going to think you're amazing for buying them a trap for these pesky Japanese beetles, and it actually draws them away from your garden and sends them all to your neighbor's garden. So they don't need to know that's the reason that you've given it to them. Honestly, I have 30 Japanese maples. I think I've seen Japanese beetles on them once or twice on a couple of them. So don't let that dissuade you.
All right, and our last question of the evening is regarding a Japanese maple. It starts out, looks great at the beginning, but by the middle of the summer, the leaves are all shriveled up. Do I water it enough, or would be the cause?
Probably a combination of water and sun. I would say move it out of direct sun and sort of tuck it into a partial sun location. It's probably just getting a little bit too much.
Great. I'm going to hand it back over to Hans to finish out the evening. And Sue.
Well,
Hi, Sue.
yep, I think it's me this time. So, Paul, I want to thank you so much. You're so enthusiastic. Your garden is just amazing. It's for something for all of us to aspire to. And I never knew there were yellow trilliums. So there's something that, well, I learned a lot, but yellow trilliums was one that I really stood out. So thank you so much for your enthusiasm, your knowledge, your passion. And we've really enjoyed the talk. So thanks very much, Paul. And you just keep on gardening there.
And thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great evening. Again, this will be recorded and on our website next week. Good evening.